Hello everyone, welcome to our lesson on budgeting, and this is, as of recording, the very last lesson of Math 9. Who knows, I might add more later on down the line, but as of right now, that's the last one. You made it, yippee! Okay, so now with budget, right, it is an estimate, Is that so weird? The noun of this is an estimate, but to a verb, to but the verb of that is to estimate. Estimate. I don't know why do we do that. Anyways, an estimate of expected income and expenses. Right, of income and expenses. Right, so it's like a little prediction of, given, let's say, in a month, how much am I earning, how much am I spending? Right, because it's important we have to budget because 70% of people who suddenly gets a large amounts of money at once, say lottery winners, or someone's wealth gets passed down, right, 70% of people who get this much money go broke usually within 7 years. Right, because they don't really budget properly. Right, so if you ever win the lottery, first of all, you should share some with me, but after that, you should make sure to budget so you don't just lose all your money in 7 years. Right, and now, even if we don't win the lottery, it's still important to budget, because then you don't have to end up borrow money from the bank, right? We learned from last time that interest, you have to pay a lot of money through interest. Right, so it's very, very important to always make sure that we know how much we're earning, how much we're spending. Okay, so tracking the spending is very important. Right, so for at least a month, just for fun, we have to track everything you spend money on. Right, so even if it's just a bottle of water, if you buy like 20 bottles of water, that's a lot of money still. Right, it's important to group those into categories. Right, we'll kind of give an example of what kind of categories are later. Right, so it's important to know exactly what you're spending your money on. Okay, next, and of course it varies for a lot of high school students, right? But we also need to figure out what income you're earning, right? Could be from a part-time job, say like babysitting, or allowance, right? That's the money that your parents give you. Again, of course that varies by household. My parents only give me allowance if I got A's in math, or like A's on my report card or something. Wild times. Fun fact, they actually took money away from me when I got a B in math. That's fun. But anyways, the budget should be based on the least amount of income, right? So you're always preparing for the worst. So let's say you work your part-time job. You usually work 20 hours, but sometimes you only work 15 hours. Right? So make sure you only lock the 15 hours as your income. Right? Always assume the worst. Because then if you have extra money left over for the month, you can go into savings. Or, spend money on something you like. Bubble tea for Mr. C. That works too. Okay? So here are some of the fixed expenses. So those are the expenses that are the same every month. Generally. So that could be things like your internet bill. Right, the internet bill, or your phone plan. Right, those things are the same every month. Or I guess they increase their price every 2 or 3 years sometimes, but generally they're the same every month. Or things like your subscriptions. Again, they'll increase over time, but generally the same. Right, so things like Spotify or Netflix, or things like car payments. Right, when you buy a car eventually, right, that's also a common thing that you see. That will not change. Right, and then we have the variable expenses. So those are the things that change every month. So those are things like your hydro bill. Right, so remember, in British Columbia, because most of our electricity comes from hydro dams, or like water power, electricity bill is called a hydro bill. Water bills are water bills. So water bills and hydro bills are different. Okay? Hydro bills are electricity. Water bills are for water. It's a very British Columbia thing. All things like food. Right, sometimes you spend more money on food, less money on food. Sometimes watermelons are seasoned and it's super cheap. Sometimes they're not and super expensive. Okay? And of course, entertainment. Right. Sometimes Nintendo release 4 games I want to buy in the same month, which is not good for my wallet. But some other times, right, I'm free. Okay, so it's important to kind of have an idea of what are the things that are always going to be the same each month, and what are things that will change each time. Because the things that are fixed, it's easy to track. And of course, we have needs and wants, right? So needs are the things that we need for survival. Those are the things you should be budgeting for most of the time, right? Whereas wants are desire for things that are not necessary but nice to have. Right? So as you can imagine, there's a lot of peer pressure, right? And that's why people will buy goods because their friends or neighbors have them, which are the peers, and even sometimes expensive things that they cannot afford. Right? So as some examples here, some needs are things like rent or housing. It could be a rent or a mortgage for your house. Right? You got food, of course. We need that to survive. Of course, bubble tea. Yeah, one can argue it's a want, but it's a need for me, of course. And probably a phone plan. Well, I say probably. In this day and age, it's getting harder and harder to go without a phone. But so it's more like a necessity. But it's not. But if you literally will be kicked out of your house because you don't have money to pay, you can stop paying for a phone plan just to get you can get a shelter, right? That's usually more important. And for want, things that are nice to have is vacations, eh? Right? Would you not need vacations to stay alive? That's nice to have. Right? So as of right now, as recording, the trend of Labubu's just died down. I don't know what trend it is happening while you're watching this right now. Right? But that's a want, right? A lot of people will buy it because of peer pressure. I I know. I mean, Labubu's very cute, of course, right? But some people will only buy it because they just wanna fit in with the trend, even though it gets dumped into the junkyard 2 or 3 years down the line. Right? So you have to be very careful about the things that you want. Right? Or things like trendy clothes. Right? We just had a huge cottage core phase. I don't know what's happening right now, and some subscriptions like Netflix or like Spotify or whatever streaming platform is happening now. Alright, so you can see here all the wants are changing every single time. Most of the time we don't actually need them to survive, and those change, right? Okay, so here's a very simple budgeting sheet that I had back in high school. This is I don't know how accurate this is, but it's like a rough estimate. Alright, so from a part-time job at Kumon, I earned around 300 every month. Right, so again, this is for 1 month. My allowance on my parents is $50. Either if I'm doing good on report cards or doing chores from around the house. Alright, saying I got really good at loading up the dishwasher. I got really fast at it. Okay, and things I spend money on is things like the phone plan. Oh, back then $40 is only like 10 gigabytes of data. Hopefully it's cheaper now, or it is cheaper now. Bubble tea, $50. That's a lot higher now. Spotify subscription. Fun fact: back then it's only $5 a month. It's pretty nice. And gas, around $100 for gas. Okay, so now how much do I have left for my savings? So all I have to do is add up all the income and then take away all the expenses. Alright, so we got a positive 155. So that goes into my savings account. Right, very nice. So if I were to overspend money for let's say next month, then I have some backup money. Okay, so now let's say in February, right here is another budget sheet. As you can see here, the income remains around, it's 200, a bit less in February perhaps. Got a lot of money from my allowance because of Lunar New Year's red envelope, super nice. Alright, but I'm not here to brag about that. The question is, what are fixed and variable? And so that's why it's important to keep track of your budget for a few months. It really opens your eyes on what are the things that I'm spending the same each month, and what are the different ones. So we can compare it to another month, like January, or like maybe not even January. This is like a random month. Right, so we can see here the phone plan remain a thing. Right, so the phone plan is fixed, and the Spotify subscription is also fixed, right? But we notice here that, of course, February it's cold. I might get stressed. I don't know. Right, bubble tea. Right, changed, and gas prices also fluctuate. Right, because perhaps in February it was colder. I don't feel like going out as much, so I was driving less. Right, so this is how you can tell if something's fixed or variable, right? You can just compare 2 months. But remember, you need at least 2 months to actually compare it to, right? Of course, the more the better. So what are suggestions that you have to reduce my expenses? Right, so maybe I can take more transits. If I take more transit, that's less money on gas, perhaps. Right, maybe a cheaper phone plan. Right, perhaps I don't need that much data. I can get a cheaper phone plan to pay maybe only 30 bucks a month. Or even like share a Spotify subscription with a friend so I can pay less. Right? Or one can say you can drink less bubble tea. But of course, I'm gonna ignore that advice. Right, so there are many different ways I can reduce my income, or well, hopefully not. Well, I can reduce my income, but reduce my expenses. Right, but it's important that we should budget to kind of understand where is the money going to. Right, this is the money that it's some hard-earned cash here. We don't want to just go to waste. Okay, so yeah, that's how we budget. But with that being said, that is the end of our lesson, and again, hopefully the end of grade 9 math. I don't know if I'll have any more lessons after this, but as of right now, hope that you have enjoyed and followed along. And yeah, with that being said, good luck practicing.